Between all of the flashy action scenes and comedy, Mob Psycho's intention is to teach its watcher important lessons about how to have a better attitude towards life and ourselves. I still keep lots of these lessons in mind in my daily life, and to be honest, I don't think I'd be nearly as self-confident and positive without everything the show has taught me, and so I want to go through and summarize the most important things we should learn from it, because maybe it could help you too. I won't be spoiling the manga. Our first major lesson turns up in episode 2. The Telepathy Club, desperate for more members, attempts to recruit our main character Mob, to allow them to keep using the club room to slack off in. Mob delays his decision, but in the meantime ends up with a mission to exorcise a ghost who used his afterlife to have fun by doing perverted things. Before being exorcised, the ghost asks Mob if he is living every day to the fullest, which Mob takes to heart. Mob ends up not joining the Telepathy Club, which he naturally fits into due to his psychic powers, and instead joins the Body Improvement Club, which he's actually not well attuned to as a person who isn't naturally sporty. There's a few things to take away from this. First is that doing what comes most easy to us isn't necessarily what's going to be the most rewarding, or be it the most valuable. Mob could already achieve basically anything he wants to due to his psychic powers, but it would feel shallow and empty. Most research into goal attainment claims that the positive experiences you can get while working towards something stem from the process of improving to reach those goals, rather than in just accomplishing those things. So doing something you enjoy improving at is often far more beneficial and pleasant than doing something you're naturally talented at. Additionally, Mob's mindset of making up for his weaknesses is a good one to have, especially as it will make him a more well-rounded and resilient person. Although arguably, working on our strengths is also just as good of an idea. The more important thing to take away here is that not dedicating our efforts to anything at all is the worst choice. Although I personally believe that obligating ourselves into personal development, rather than doing what we actually want to do, can be more harmful. There is value in doing nothing, particularly as stress relief. We are also introduced to the Body Improvement Club in the episodes after this, who are just the best, most supportive people of all time. They're serious about training themselves, and they're serious about helping others train themselves. The club represents the importance of a strong support network, which encourages and helps you when you need it. I will talk about this more later, but it's worth keeping in mind. The next lesson comes in episode 3, which focuses primarily on Mob's character development and flaws, pointing out his lack of physical strength and ability to get a clue. These are framed as bad things which people should aim to improve on, and while that's a pretty commonly held view, I would still like to point out how things like this can often come with their own set of strengths. For example, a person who cannot get a clue might be able to say the things which should be said, but most people are too afraid to say. Anyway, the point here is that these are things that Mob recognizes that he wants to grow beyond. Our next lesson starts in episode 4. We find out that Mob believes his abilities are far less useful to him than it might seem, especially as Mob is more interested in things like developing his emotional intelligence and physical strength, which psychic abilities can't help with. We are also introduced to Teru Hanazawa, an egotistical psychic who is basically the epitome of the phrase, big fish in a small pond, as someone who believes they are the best in the world, and therefore can take advantage of his psychic powers to do whatever he wants, as opposed to Mob, who finds his powers useless, and does not believe that they give him any degree of superiority. Episode 5 consists mostly of the ideological clash between Mob and Hanazawa. Mob tries to push his belief that psychic powers shouldn't be used to hurt people, in the same way you shouldn't point a knife at someone. Hanazawa attacks him, but an unfortunate accident leads to Hanazawa losing most of his hair, to which he is angered, and attacks Mob with even more ferocity. Mob claims that Hanazawa is just like himself, as someone who would be insignificant without having psychic powers, and eventually the attacks Mob is receiving cause him to pass out, which leads to his emotions reaching unknown percent and destroying the school, while also sending Hanazawa flying into the air. At this point, Hanazawa realizes that he is just an average person, with some added psychic powers. Mob ends up reconstructing the school, and Hanazawa admits that Mob is right about them being nothing without their powers. Although at this point the Body Improvement Club members check up on Mob, making Hanazawa realize that Mob has something which he doesn't. That actually puts Mob in a better position than him, having friends who care. The point of this episode is to show that we shouldn't be too arrogant about our own abilities, as we are likely not as great as we believe, particularly when it comes to believing that our abilities make us better than others. The upside of having such a negative attitude is that it avoids overconfidence, and the risk of putting ourselves in bad situations, where we are not actually capable of achieving what we believe we can. But I don't think having a little confidence in ourselves is a bad thing, especially when you have the experience to back that up. It's also worth pointing out that this episode shows the importance of having friends who care about you, and a support network through the Body Improvement Club. Although while I agree with this idea, the people or things you find support from don't have to be a group like the Body Improvement Club, but rather just whatever you find supports you when you need it. Additionally, it's often worth having multiple things that support you, seeing as it is risky to rely on just one thing, as that thing might not always be available. Our next major lesson does not appear until the end of the first season, where after Ritsu's newly developed psychic powers lead to him being kidnapped by an evil organization called Claw, the attempt to rescue him acts as a backdrop for the lesson to occur in. Between all of the action scenes, we do also get to see Reigen manage to bluff through to convincing the lower level Claw members that he is actually the organization's boss, which shows the value that irrationally overblown confidence and persuasive ability can sometimes have. It isn't until the last fight in the rescue arc that the lessons start presenting themselves. First, we see the value in letting others deal with the things which we can't handle, or that we shouldn't put ourselves through. In Mob lending Reigen his powers to fight the Claw members. When there are things which you do not feel you can achieve, it's fine to rely on others for help. We also get to experience Reigen teaching the Claw members a lesson through his words as well as his fists. The crux of it comes down to the Claw members believing they deserve to rule over society, either because their powers make them special and therefore deserving, or because they need a place to belong as society won't accept them in Sakurai's case. Reigen points out how this idea is childish for a number of different reasons. For example, Reigen claims that they are using their powers for the stupidest things, and that they will always be left out of society because what they are doing goes against its wider interests. You wouldn't exactly want to be best friends with a person trying to murder you after all. The line, "if you want to make it big, you have to live in reality," shows this idea. The point is that the Claw members have to use their talents and efforts within society, or else they will always remain outcasts, and never be accepted in the way they want to be. Another interesting part of this idea to me relates to the long-running theme of psychic powers not being all that special in the grand scheme of things. It's true that a powerful enough psychic could rule the entire world, even if there wouldn't actually be much value in doing so, but the kinds of powers we see from the Claw members likely would not be enough to stand up against a platoon of soldiers or a missile. Their abilities are not actually good enough to fulfill their goals. I would be inclined to say that a person seeking world domination would be much better off being charismatic and good at persuading people than being able to shoot fire. Again, this shows how the Claw members would be much better off living in reality. Season 2 immediately dives into an important piece of character development for Mob, being the first time since he was a child that he uses his psychic abilities to help someone without being encouraged to, outside of for protecting them. This first of all shows that Mob is starting to accept his abilities as a part of himself, and as something that can do things other than just cause trouble. Moreover, the message of the episode becomes clear from Mob's line, "I made the decision to consider my feelings more," which is built up to by Emmy asking him if he even has feelings. Mob realizes that all the time he had been spending trying to control his emotions hasn't actually helped himself or the people around him, and has instead just made him unhappy with himself, and unable to appreciate valuable things like Emmy's novel, which leads to him hurting her feelings as he is unable to form an opinion on it. The message here is pretty simple, but to summarize, it is important to care about things. Our next valuable lesson comes in Reigen's realization that Mob is hesitant to exercise the family of ghosts in episode 3 of season 2. Reigen recognizes that from Mob's perspective, there's not all that much difference between ghosts and humans, as he has always dealt with both in equal parts, and so asking Mob to exercise ghosts which are not evil spirits is like asking him to murder an innocent person. The lesson here is that people's circumstances and perspectives can massively affect the way they interpret different situations. Something which seems reasonable and natural to Reigen at first is horrifying to Mob because their perspectives are different, and this of course applies in real life as well. For example, asking a person if you can borrow something like a pencil might be an extremely difficult thing for them to do if they have germophobia, and if they do not want to let you borrow their pencil, it's not because they don't care enough about you to do even minor things for you, but rather because what you are asking of them is far more major than you realize. It's difficult to know if what you're asking of someone is more difficult than it seems for them, and so it's important to either not be too forceful, or to try and be considerate of their circumstances and feelings. The Mogami arc contains lessons about the nature of life and humanity. First, that the real world and the people in it can be cruel and heartless, even for completely selfish reasons like self-satisfaction. Mogami is right about this idea, but his view is massively overblown. There are awful people out there, but there are also loads of people who are genuinely supportive and nice. The difference between Mob and Mogami is that Mob recognizes that not everyone is awful, and that even awful people are capable of change, and it's because of this that they are often worth helping, and being given second chances. We now move on to the Reagan arc, in which Reagan is exposed as a conman. Reagan is a pretty awful person when you look at the things he does throughout the show, like scamming and guilt-tripping people. The arc shows how his bad treatment of the people around him, and the fact his relationships are built on him lying to people and exploiting them, rather than actually caring about them, meant that it was only ever a matter of time until that was exposed, and he ended up abandoned. And this is exactly what happens. The important thing here is that Reagan is able to learn from this happening and to recognize how he needs to improve as a person and stop trying to exploit people. This means that people are able to accept him again, and Mob is able to call him a genuinely good guy, validating and encouraging him to improve as a person. Our past defines us much less than our current choices and efforts. The world domination arc starts pretty much directly after Reagan's arc. There's a few more lessons to be found in this arc. There's small bits about the value of hard work, with Musashi's homegrown muscles being more effective than psychically made ones, showing the value in not choosing outcomes, and also about the value of teamwork in the Shimasaki fight. One of the interesting lessons is Mob pointing out how, despite the fact that he and the Claw members have amazing powers, they still rely on other people to support them even just to live. Psychic powers are often not enough to be able to do things like fix broken glass, grow vegetables, and manufacture things. Even amazing people need to recognize they still need to rely on others to live, and therefore should treat other people with respect. Mob also recognizes the importance of being proactive in teaching other people sometimes, rather than just leaving them to do whatever they want, like with the Claw lackeys in episode 11, rather than letting them hurt themselves and others, and also to be hard on people to protect them and himself. Reagan's arguments about world domination being a stupid goal are brought into question with the real boss of Claw, Tuichiro. To recall, Reagan talks about how the Claw members lacked life experience, a focus on reality, and the power to achieve those goals. But Tuichiro has all of those things. He's travelled the world, amassed an army, and is skilled as a leader. Tuichiro has everything he needs to rule the world, and the only thing which stops him is Mob himself. Following Reagan's logic from before, Tuichiro does indeed deserve to rule the world, but the thing is, Tuichiro's efforts to rule the world leave him full of regret, because in the process, he ends up leaving his family behind. World domination, even among the most capable of us, still isn't worth the effort. Even someone who is extremely individualistic like Tuichiro still wants and needs other people. It's an important reminder that we should never pursue our goals to the point of ruining our lives and relationships, as even the grandest goal still is not worth it. The final lesson I'd like to mention happened during Mob's fight with Tuichiro. Mob recognizes that there are people who cannot be communicated to by words, and will only learn by seeing the consequences of their own actions. It's a difficult thing to apply in real life, but sometimes there are people who are like that. Mob Psycho is not the only show out there which tries to teach its viewer life lessons. Often even the most mindless show will still convey an important lesson, even if only accidentally. In my view, one of the best things we can do for ourselves when enjoying a piece of media is to keep an eye out for those lessons and internalize them. It's an easy way to cheat past a lot of the hardships which we would otherwise need to experience to get those important life lessons.